Hi, I'm Shreya and this is Decoding Code. In this video, we'll be talking about casting numerical values, and I won't waste any time, so let's just jump straight into the definition. So casting numerical values is basically just taking one type of numerical value and making it into another type of numerical value. Now, you're not changing anything about the data inside. Well, in some cases you do, but we'll get into that later. In most cases, you're not changing any of the values inside of your variable, you are just changing the type of the variable. And so you could be changing an integer to a long or a float to a double. Now in one of my previous videos, I actually used casting. I just didn't really explain it at all. So here you can see I actually did some stuff with all of the primitive variables, and this might be a little bit confusing why I decided to cast a byte to a byte. Now, what you don't see here is that bytes, shorts, and longs randomly default into integers when you do certain things like these equations, and floats default into doubles. Now, this is a weird phenomenon that happens in Java, but that's just one of the reasons why you could use casting. Now, you can see there is an error here when I took out that parentheses byte, and that is how you cast. So it says type mismatch cannot convert from int to byte, and it's basically it's already defaulted to an integer, and it's saying that how can a byte this byte c be equal to an integer? And yeah, that's the problem here, and that's why we need to use casting. And then that error just completely goes away, because now it's seeing this as a byte and this also as a byte. Now we do that for short, we do that for long, we do that for floats, doubles and integers we don't need to do that for, since they kind of default to themselves. One thing to note is that you cannot, let's say you have an integer that's over 128 and you try to convert that into a byte. Now that's not going to work because a byte doesn't have a memory beyond -28 to 127, I believe. So it can't physically or mentally in the computer's mind, I don't know, but it can't hold that much. It can't hold that value. So that's why we sometimes you can make mistakes in casting and cast something that's too big to something that's too small, and that's okay. It's just we need to be careful about what we cast and make sure that the memory is actually enough to hold that variable. Another thing to note is that yes, you can cast a double to, let's just say, an int, but what's going to happen is that if you cast this double to an integer, all the decimal places here will be left out. So I'm going to quickly demonstrate that. Here I have cast this. So here we have this double p, and we have this integer I up here, and what I've done is I've made this p an integer, and basically after I print it, it comes out as 22. So this double is 22 point blah 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 blah, but it just completely takes all of that, all of the decimal points out and is just 22. So if I put it to something that would round up, it is still 22. Now it doesn't care about rounding. It basically just cuts off whatever is the decimal point. We could basically cast anything as anything. But when you cast a numerical value that is larger than the thing you're trying to cast it as, then there will be some problems. You might not get what you were actually intending for. Let's see if so this integer g is way larger than what a byte would hold. So let's try to make that integer and cast it as a byte and see what happens. It doesn't give me an error, which is interesting because this integer cannot fit into a byte, but let's see what happens when I try to print this. Okay, so it's basically just gone to 0. The moral of this story, don't try to force something like a numerical value that doesn't fit into, like, let's just say a byte, don't try to force it into a byte because you won't get what you're intending to get. Now, if this, let's say this int h was something closer to like 128, now I want to see what happens. See, it's different. It's negative 128, and that's actually the minimum value for a byte. And because a byte is negative 128 to 127, so it kind of like went back to the minimum. Be very careful when you are trying to cast variables, because you might not get what you're intending if the thing that you're trying to cast does not fit into the type that you're trying to cast it to. Now, I hope that you learn more about casting from this video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, and I will see you guys again next week with the new video. Bye!